terribly creepy story my grandpa used to tell me about his experience in World War II. The following is a story my grandpa used to tell me before he passed away. I thought Arno Sleep might be able to appreciate it. This story is really long, so if you don't want to read the full story, I'd suggest skipping the first 2 paragraphs. Disclaimer, I'm not a WWWI buff, and I'm just telling this story the way I remember hearing it. Some dates, locations may be slightly off. My grandpa was a British infantryman in the Second World War. He was only about 19 years old when he enlisted to serve his country, and while he thought that joining the military would give him opportunities to see exotic locations around the world, he was never deployed to Tunisia, Italy, or the Pacific. Instead, he ended up practically in his own backyard, Switzerland. This is just some historical information, but it's important to understand before reading the rest of this story. Switzerland did its best to maintain neutral status throughout the war. But regardless of its attempts to maintain neutrality, Switzerland was still highly sought after by both the Allied and the Axis powers. Once the Nazis began committing acts of aggression against Switzerland, England provided reinforcements to the Swiss military. Yet, in an effort to prevent open war within its borders, the Swiss government instructed its military and subsequently the British reinforcements to perform a series of tactical retreats into the Alps. That's how my grandpa found himself stationed in a remote village in the Swiss Alps. At this time, it was early in the winter of 1943, and my grandpa's company was stationed in a secluded village of about 500 people. Part of the advantage that they had with this location was that it was really hard to get to and therefore had little chance of being spontaneously invaded by Nazi Germany. But this was also a disadvantage because it made communication with the rest of the Swiss military very difficult. The issue with communication was further compounded when sometime in early December, a series of blizzards swept through the region and completely destroyed the few lines of communication that they had in the first place. So, essentially trapped in this isolated Swiss village without being able to make contact with the rest of the army, my grandpa's captain decided it would be best to uphold the standing orders and continue defending the village. Weeks passed. Any roads to the outside world were buried in 7 to 9 feet of dense snowfall, and any telegraph phone lines that they had were equally useless. It grew deeper into winter, the leaves were stripped from the trees, and the bare trunks protruded from the mountainside like broken ribs. The town was nestled between 2 large mountains, and sunlight only directly reached the town for a few hours each day, making the soldiers feel as if they were living in a state of perpetual dusk. One night my grandpa was at the town bar with a few of his friends from the company, and a group of locals approached them. One of them in particular was visibly upset. All of the Swiss people in the town grew up speaking German, and none of them were used to having Brits around, so one of them began shouting in broken English. "Where? Take you. The children." Luckily, one of the guys my grandpa was drinking with spoke fluent German and was able to act as an impromptu translator. After several minutes of confusion and yelling, the translator turned to my grandpa and the rest of the soldiers and said, "They say some of the village children have gone missing. They want us to do something about it." Now, obviously, the British military doesn't exactly act as a bunch of mercenaries for hire, so my grandpa and his friends told the villagers to come back to the headquarters, really just a makeshift barracks that they had thrown together in the town's church, to talk to the captain. Due to the language barrier, the villagers' discussion with the captain took about 2 hours. And basically what the captain and his self-designated translator were able to piece together was that a few weeks after the company entered the village, the locals had noticed a variety of bizarre incidents. At first, it was just benign stuff like vanishing, pieces of wood and tarp from people's sheds. But over the following 2 months, people realized that valuable items were being stolen from their homes. One man claimed that his family heirloom, a handmade ceremonial halberd, sort of like a traditional Swiss war axe, had disappeared from above his fireplace mantel. The culmination of all of these incidents was when a village child went missing. Of course, many assumed that the child's disappearance, although tragic and disconcerting, could be attributed to something as simple as the boy falling into a snowdrift while playing outside, or possibly being attacked and killed by a wolf or other predatory animal. But there wasn't only one child that disappeared. There were several. The villager who entered the bar looked especially upset. That was the father of 2 young boys who had gone missing 2 days before. He had searched everywhere for them, even rounded up a posse of his fellow townspeople to join the effort, but they couldn't find a single clue as to what had happened to the children. The captain told the villagers that he would continue to look into the matter, and that he would begin sending some of his men to patrol the streets each night looking for whoever or whatever was the culprit behind all the strange thefts and abductions. Later that night, Private Reginald disappeared from the barracks. Disappearing children was one thing, but a grown man. It seemed unlikely that an animal, even a wolf, could have taken down a healthy, full-grown man on its own. Naturally, rumors began to surface that there was some sort of monster living in the mountains that came down at night to feast on the occupants of the village. Despite the nightly patrols ordered by the captain, the disappearances kept occurring. Reginald was the only adult victim of whatever was preying on the village. The rest of the victims were all young kids between the ages of 5 and 10. All in all, including the original 3 kids who had gone missing, 7 children vanished from the town. Many people in my grandpa's company were growing suspicious. One explanation that got passed around was that impoverished villagers were actually selling their own children to human traffickers for extra cash. But even that didn't make sense, because the roads into and out of the town were still blocked by snow. 3 more weeks passed without incident. At this point, it was early spring and the snow was starting to thaw. That night, coincidentally, when my grandpa was on patrol with several other soldiers, they discovered what was behind the children's and Reginald's disappearances. It was sometime past midnight when my grandpa and his comrades noticed a figure peering through the bedroom window of one of the villagers' houses. My grandpa was at the opposite end of the street, so at first, the figure looking through the window didn't see the patrol. My grandpa and the other soldiers yelled at the prowler, and it immediately tore itself away from the window and began running away. Everyone in the patrol was certain that this was what was behind the disappearances and break-ins. They ran as fast as they could in pursuit, through the melting snow and ice in the dead of night, screaming at whatever it was to stop. They kept running and running, and soon they found themselves on the outskirts of the village, where the snow was still fairly deep. The figure jumped into the ground. It looked like it had vanished into thin air at first, but as the patrol grew closer, they realized that the prowler had actually just jumped into a cave that had been hollowed out in the side of a snowdrift. Just as the soldiers began yelling into the cave for the figure to come out and show itself, several gunshots exploded out of the entrance to the snow cave. Without thinking, my grandpa and the rest of the patrol shouldered their weapons and all began firing into the hole. Silence. They waited for what seemed like hours, but was really just a couple of minutes. One incredibly brave member of the patrol volunteered to climb into the cave and investigate. He drew his pistol, kneeled down, and crawled into the cave. Several seconds later, he emerged with a completely horrified expression on his face. My grandpa took out his flashlight and shined it into the cave when he saw the gruesome explanation behind the strange occurrences in the town. The figure that they had been chasing was Reginald, the private who had gone missing weeks before. They had shot Reginald right through the heart. The cave was not only occupied by Reginald, but also the bodies of 7 partially eaten children. Either due to the stress of being snowed in all winter, living in near constant darkness, or some sort of terrible mental issue, Reginald had gone completely insane and had begun breaking into the villagers' houses and snatching their children from their homes in the middle of the night. He had used the halberd that had been reported missing to dismember the bodies after he slit the children's throats and hid them in the cave he carved into the snowdrift. P.L. Dr. My grandpa was stationed in the Swiss Alps during WWII and got snowed in a remote village. Kids began disappearing from the village. Turns out one of the soldiers that had gone missing from his company actually was abducting the children and cannibalizing them in a hidden snow cave that he had constructed on the outskirts of the town. There's creepy ghost girl watching me, and it's getting scary. This story will have a lot of time skips since the girl shows up pretty often, but only does anything noticeable once in a while. It all started back in the late spring, early summer of 2017. I'm writing this in late January 2018, somewhere between April and June. I started hearing something strange. A couple times a week I would hear soft footsteps coming up the stairs, as if one of my parents was coming upstairs. I would only hear this late at night, and only when I was alone. I have a dresser with a mirror above it that faces the door of my room. The top of the stairs is at the other end of the hallway, so whenever I look in the mirror I can see the top of the stairs and anyone coming up. However, whenever I heard these footsteps, I wouldn't see anyone coming upstairs. Fast forward to July. Not only was I still hearing things, I started seeing things as well. One night I saw a girl standing at the top of the stairs. This was the first time I had ever seen her, and she looked absolutely terrifying. I'm used to her now, though. I'm going to give her a name. Sarah. It's probably not her real name. I don't know if she has one. Anyways, Sarah is tall, always wears a white dress, and has long, shaggy black hair that covers her face. I'm rather glad about that because I'm not sure if I want to see her face. I saw Sarah twice in 1 week during July. I knew she wasn't one of my parents. She was too tall for my mom, and my dad didn't have long hair. Sightings of Sarah were usually accompanied by strange footsteps. Whenever I would tell my parents about Sarah, they wouldn't believe me. They don't believe in ghosts or anything of that sort, and I don't either. Usually. I also started hearing and seeing more strange things. I don't know if they're connected to Sarah in any way. One afternoon I heard banging coming from one of our 3 attics. I also heard knocking inside the walls. One of our attics is connected to my closet. Every once in a while I hear shuffling footsteps and strange noises like breathing coming from the attic. Ever since I started seeing Sarah, I occasionally find random bruises and small cuts on my body, usually on my legs, arms, head, hands, and feet. I don't remember bumping into anything or cutting myself, and I don't know if this has anything to do with Sarah. I hope not, because if so, that's just plain scary. Okay, here's where things get creepy. I installed a silver bead curtain in the entrance to my closet. However, after finding some chewed up pieces of string on the floor, I realized my cat had been helping himself to the curtain whenever the humans weren't home. I tied the curtains up out of his reach, and they're still like that today. There was a period of time, though, when the curtains were just hanging loose. It was during that time that, late one night, I saw the curtains move as if someone had brushed their hand against it. It wasn't my cat. He was asleep on my bed, and there were no open windows or fans to move the curtains. They just moved. A couple of nights after this happened, I had a dream. In the dream, I looked at my alarm clock, and it was 2 a.m. I realized I was rather hot, so I stuck my foot out from under the covers. I felt my foot touch something cold, freezing cold. I realized my dresser, the mirror above it, and the chair in front of it were all gone. Completely gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. The Harry Potter posters I had put around and above my dresser were still there, though. Standing under the posters, where my dresser normally is, was Sarah. She was leaning against the wall, facing away from me, and looking into my closet. The freezing thing my foot had felt was Sarah's right arm. She didn't seem to notice me, or the fact that I had accidentally kicked her. The dream ended. I had the exact same dream again, that very same night, at 5 a.m. The next morning, my mom noticed that my dresser was shifted slightly to one side. Fast forward to the present day. I never had that dream again, but I've been seeing Sarah out of the corner of my eye practically everywhere I go in my house. She's always there just watching me. When I blink, she's gone. Everything's been fairly normal, if you can call seeing a creepy girl watching you normal. Except for last night. Last night was absolutely terrifying. I couldn't sleep until well after midnight, about 12:30. I dozed off for a couple of hours only to have horrible nightmares, most of them revolving around Sarah. I woke up often not sure whether I was in a dream or reality. I was switching around between terrifying dreams and confusing reality so much that it was hard to tell exactly where I was. I had my earbuds in all night as usual, listening to the Harry Potter movie soundtracks. Whenever I woke up and the soundtrack was depicting a scary scene, I would keep my eyes shut tight while switching the song because I was afraid if I opened my eyes the demons from my dream would get me. Once the song was happy again, I would go back to sleep and back to nightmares. That's how weird my night was. I dreamed of evil spirits and demons trying to get me, along with an evil Sarah standing by my bed. Last night was the first time I ever saw her face. And I'm not going to describe it in detail because you only have to imagine your worst fear. Once I was fully awake and realized the sky was getting lighter outside, I felt much safer and went back to sleep. I didn't have nightmares, just weird and confusing dreams that aren't really important. So, that's what's going on. As I write this, it's 7:18 p.m., January 26, 2018, and it's dark outside. My house feels different. After last night, I don't know how to describe it, but I don't like it. I'm definitely going to create a playlist of cheerful music to listen to, and hope that tonight will be better. Any ideas as to what the heck is going on? Please let me know. Hope you all enjoyed the story. So last night I had some dreams. They started out normal enough but got a bit weirder. I remember two in particular. For some reason, Sarah was standing in my church, exactly halfway down the middle aisle. I have no idea why. Here's the next dream. It woke me up and freaked me out really badly. In the dream, I was sitting on the couch in my basement with a blanket on my lap. I just realized that, as I'm writing this, I'm sitting on the very same couch with the very same blanket on my lap. I'm gonna die. Yay. Back to the story. So, in this dream, I heard a weird noise in the closet under the basement stairs. I leaned over and opened the door. It was dark inside, but I could see bones and pieces of someone's body lying around on the floor. Thankfully, I saw all this out of my peripheral vision, since I was focusing on the other thing inside. In the darkest corner of the closet, I saw a girl who looked exactly like a miniature Sarah, except with very sharp teeth and nails and a hollower, more dead eyes. The tiny girl was barely 2 feet tall. In the dream, she started talking. Just think of the most terrifying and demonic female voice. She only said one word and repeated it over and over. Sections, sections, sections. That's weird. Anyway, in my dream, I somehow knew what she meant. The things lying on the closet floor were sections of someone's body. That's what she was talking about. She slowly exited the closet and began slowly crawling onto the couch where I was sitting, frozen with fear. I caught a glimpse of her face. Let's just say I'm not forgetting that sight anytime soon. Just as she reached me, I woke up. As this was happening in my dream, I somehow knew she wanted to either kill me or possess me. She wanted me, bit by bit, in sections. The thing is, I saw this tiny girl's shadow on the wall yesterday evening, but thought nothing of it and decided not to worry. Also, for the past few days, whenever my cat comes down into the basement, he freaks out and runs around sniffing at random things. He seems to think there's something under this couch. He used to love playing inside the closet in my dreams, but now he avoids it like the plague. I wonder why. Here's some more weird stuff. This morning I was sitting in church in my usual spot, which happens to be right next to where Sarah was standing in my dream. In the middle of the service, my hair tie snapped for no reason whatsoever. It wasn't worn out. I hadn't been moving around or pulling on my hair. It just broke and somehow landed right in my lap. It didn't hit anyone, but my hair came out of the ponytail. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, here's why I'm freaking out. I just finished eating dinner. The back of my right hand looked and felt perfectly normal when I started eating, and there's no way it came in contact with anything sharp. I wasn't using a knife to cut my food either. As I finished my meal, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my right hand. I looked at my hand and saw a bloody scratch about 1 inch long. There's no way I did that. There's absolutely no way. The scratch is now purple. That's definitely not normal. I'm terrified this is the first section. I'm very afraid for my safety, and I am never going in that closet again. A big, scary house in the woods. It took 2 days to hike to the spot we'd heard about a strange house standing alone in the middle of the woods. And if it couldn't possibly sound any more cliché, the rumors were that the former owners of the house haunted it and killed anyone who dared to enter. From the outside, it looked unremarkable. Had it not been in the middle of the forest with nothing around but trees and rocks, the house would have looked like any other rundown home in a bad area. But the fact remained it was the only man-made structure for miles. Why? Let alone how anyone would haul construction materials through the inhospitable wilderness to build a place was beyond my or my boyfriend's understanding. Being journalists for the high school paper, we came armed with our notebooks and tablets. John tried to peer through the windows, but there was nothing to see. The windows were smoked out. It looked like there'd been a minor fire inside at some point. The front door was locked, but around the back, there was a rusted-out hole in the cellar door. It was just wide enough for John to fit through. No way my boobs were getting through that hole, unless I did way more squashing than I was in the mood to do. No. It was okay. John would go through and open the front door for me. After a bit of squeezing and cursing, John made his way into the cellar. Looking at the ragged, rusty metal he'd just forced himself through, I wondered when he'd last gotten a tetanus booster. With a shudder, I made my way over to the front of the house and waited for him to let me inside. I waited and waited. After a couple of minutes, I heard John banging on the door from behind to get it open. "It doesn't want to move," he shouted from the other side. "Can you find something to break it open?" I called back. "A crowbar or something." The banging stopped as he looked around. More waiting. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a doe and her fawn. I was spellbound. Growing up in the city, this had been my first trip into the woods since I was a little girl. I'd never gotten to see deer in real life. I carefully moved in the direction of the animals, crouching low so I didn't frighten them, and held out my hand. The ears of the deer perked up and they watched me intently, trying to determine if I was a threat. In my head, I was pleading with them to come over. "It's okay, guys," I whispered sweetly. "It's okay." I held my breath as the fawn stepped toward me. It was so close. The mother wasn't stopping it as it got nearer and nearer, so close that I could see my reflection in its wide, inquisitive eyes. A massive bang sounded from behind me, making me jump and sending the deer running for their lives. "God damn it, John," I yelled, turning around. "You scared them all." I stopped talking and froze. The door had flown off its hinges onto the front steps. In the doorway stood a thick, bulbous, corpse-like man. He was swollen and burned, almost like he'd been soaked in gasoline for months then set on fire. And in his hand he held the severed head of John, whose eyes stared straight ahead with confused shock. I screamed and began to run. "Stay away from our home," came a voice so loud and powerful it caused me to stumble and fall. I righted myself and looked over my shoulder, tears streaming down my eyes. There was another thing now, a woman standing shoulder to shoulder with John's murderer. Her mouth opened, and she bellowed, "And don't Fwan come back." She lumbered down the steps and picked up the door. She carried it back up, and before she set it back in the remains of its frame, the husband took John's head and threw it in my direction. I heard it hit the ground behind me as I ran, but I never saw his face again. Never. Except in my nightmares. Not so long ago in my city, I don't know if you heard about this, but a drunken bus drove his bus into a choir class in elementary school and killed almost every one of those kids in that class. It was a very sad moment for my city. Anyway, I'm a 16 years old who doesn't believe in ghosts or any paranormal shit. One night I get a call from my friends and I'm invited to play soccer. Although it was 11 p.m., I agreed, and my friends and I met and started playing soccer. I didn't realize back then that the field we were playing was very close to the school that the drunken bus driver drove into. Anyway, after hours of playing, one of my friends, there were three, kicked the ball out of the field, and it landed in that school. We argued about who should get the ball, and eventually we agreed that we should all go find it. We climbed into that school and we tried to search for the ball. It was so dark, you could barely see anything. After 10 minutes of looking, we were tired and we wanted to go home. I look at my watch and it's about 3:30 if I remember correctly. Suddenly my friends started to hear a tiny high-pitched voice coming. We didn't know where it was coming from. We went toward the voice, and it became louder and louder. Suddenly we were facing a wall, and we realized that the voices were coming from behind that wall. We listened very closely, and it sounds like a huge choir of angels singing in a perfect high-pitched noise. Suddenly my heart missed a beat. I was shaking, and I almost wanted to kill myself. I realized that the place where the voices were coming from was the same choir class that had been killed by the bus driver. The moment I realized, I ran for my life while shouting to my friends what I realized. They started running too. It was so dark we could barely see our feet. We ran, and we couldn't find the exit, and the choir music became louder and louder. I felt like those spirits were closing on me, like I was trapped in a spirit world. I ran in circles while my friends followed me until we found a small bridge in the wall, and we slipped ourselves through it. When we got out, my friends and I almost fainted. We couldn't speak. It's like we met death himself. From that point on, I never walked past that school ever again. Sometimes at night, I can still hear those choir of angels singing. I can see those children's faces while I'm dreaming. But they have no faces, but they are crying.